I knew something was wrong from the moment the rotors stopped. When the engine noise died, the world dropped suddenly into a hollow of wind and groaning metal. All that remained was the howl of the Arctic wind along the fuselage, threading through the metal seams, and the crunch of my boots on the steel deck of the landing pad. The gauge in my helmet read -40. The cold hit me like a solid wall, harder than any concrete I had ever breached. I pulled my tactical jacket tight, opened the collar slightly so my breath wouldn't freeze on the scarf, then raised my head to look. Arctic Research Station Delta 7 sprawled out in front of me like a pile of gigantic steel containers thrown onto the ice and then stitched together with covered walkways. Everything was angles, bolts, dirty gray metal surfaces, not a single unnecessary decoration. The kind of structure built to withstand wind and cold, not to be pretty. The whole complex stood on steel supports driven deep into the permafrost. The wind had carved the ice into sharp ridges around the bases. A faint shimmer of heat rose from the exhaust stacks and vents, the only signs that something inside was still alive, in some sense of the word. I tightened the straps of my armor and tapped the pistol at my hip to make sure it was still exactly where it should be. The weight of my gear pressed into my shoulders, familiar enough to be almost comforting. An encrypted radio, a med kit, a few survival packs, and the standard technical toolkit for unplanned situations. The original assignment had sounded simple enough, a short extraction run before the storm hit. 3 hours from Anchorage, Director Bonnie Hill had talked almost the entire way. Her voice was dry as paper, but the file on the tablet was packed with detail. 6 scientists out of contact for 3 days. They had been drilling nearly 2 miles down through the ice to reach something logged as artifact origin unknown. The weather does not wait for people. Another low-pressure system was curling down from the north. If we did not get them out now, it could be weeks. That was why there was only 1 helicopter, 1 pilot, and just me. Hill had stressed it at least 3 times. This is a retrieval mission, Dennis, not a rescue. After 3 days out here, the probability of anyone surviving a walk away from the station was close to 0. My job was to lock the facility down, collect all data, and leave everything tidy for the investigation team when the weather allowed. I gave the pilot a hand signal. All good. He just nodded once, then bent back over the control panel. Nobody wanted to stay here a second longer than necessary. The engine roared, the rotors whipped the snow into a white column, and the helicopter lifted off. The noise faded until there was only a strange, hollow silence. I was truly alone. Just me, Delta 7, and the wind. The main entrance was about 50 meters from the pad, linked by an enclosed corridor that looked like an old plastic tube beaten half to death by the wind. Ice had built up thickly on the joints. A few roof panels had been ripped and twisted. On top of the antenna tower, a red warning light blinked steadily, casting a red sweep across the ice. The automatic distress signal and a reminder that nobody had answered a call in 3 days. I thumbed the button on my radio. Command. This is Dennis. On site at Delta 7. Beacon is active. No personnel visible outside. Only static. Not the usual clean hiss of an empty channel, but a harsh scraping kind, broken into jagged pieces, as if someone were trying to force a warped voice through the magnetic storm. I switched frequencies and tried again. Command Dennis. Radio check over. This time, I was almost sure I heard something like a human voice shredded inside the interference. Then it was gone. The gear had worked perfectly on the chopper. Down here, the atmosphere itself felt like it was trying to strangle every conversation. I clipped the radio back onto my harness, making a mental note. Once inside, try again from the internal system. The corridor to the station was just an unheated metal tube, literally blocks the wind but not the cold. Every breath I exhaled turned into a small cloud, fogging the already cloudy panels before freezing. The whole structure groaned with each gust, steel scraping steel in long, drawn-out sounds, like someone walking beside me without breathing. The main door was a double airlock, 2 heavy doors with a small buffer space to keep the heat in. The outer layer wasn't locked. In an emergency, nobody was going to stand around entering a code. I stepped into the space between the doors, waited for the hiss of pressure equalizing, and then the inner door slid open. The first slap wasn't cold. It was heat. After the skin-cutting chill outside, the inside temperature felt like stepping into a boiler room. Sweat burst out instantly under the thick layers, seeping into the seams. But it wasn't the comfortable warmth of a stable heating system. It was dense, heavy, pressing against the skin, the heat of a machine forced to run at maximum for far too long. The second slap was the light. Instead of cold white lighting, the corridor ceiling held only red emergency strips. The main system had shut down. Only the emergency lights remained. The red warped distances. Every color was swallowed, leaving only darkness and deeper, blacker streaks where shadows had no right to be that deep. I drew my gun and kept it low. No human voices, no machine noise, just the distant rumble of HVAC somewhere and a thick, clotted silence, the kind that made you feel like if you spoke too loudly, the building itself would turn to look at you. The corridor ran straight, doors on both sides leading to labs, storage, and living quarters. From a distance, everything looked clean, sterile, federal standard. But the farther I walked, the more tiny details made my skin prickle. On the walls, someone had used something very hard to carve into the steel, not graffiti, not the bored curse words of a frustrated tech crew. Symbols, marks repeating in sequences, stretching from one section of wall into the next. Some looked vaguely like letters from a language I didn't know. Others were pure geometry, circle within circle, intersecting lines, sharp angles stacked on top of each other until staring too long made my eyes ache. I stopped in front of one of the more complex symbols, like an equation ripped apart and stitched back together with a different thread. I tried to read it, to understand its structure the way my mind was used to processing maps and tactical diagrams. My head started to hurt, heavy, dull, like the ache was pressing from behind my eye sockets. Tears welled up, not from emotion, just my eyes protesting. I turned away before the headache could become something worse. Metal shavings lay scattered beneath some of the carvings, catching the red light. No rust. These cuts were fresh within the last few days, if not the last few hours. The question wasn't who thought this was a fun prank. The question was, what can slice through reinforced steel like butter? According to the schematic on my tablet, the end of the corridor was the common area, the place where the team would eat, relax, argue, fight over results. The last place that might still smell like people. The sliding door opened. No blood, no bullet holes, no obvious violence in the way I was used to seeing it. There was something worse. The whole room looked like it had just been used for a ritual I had no desire to name. Tables and chairs were overturned, but not at random. They were arranged into shapes so precise it was unsettling. Chairs stacked into columns, tables lined up in sharp diagonals. Books and papers laid out in circles and spirals, mirroring the patterns on the walls. Piles of personal items, sweaters, coffee mugs, family photos, had been gathered into small grids, like tiles in a map that didn't belong to any human mind. At the very center of the paper circle, I found the name I'd been reading for the entire 3-hour flight. Dr. Dana Turner. Not the woman herself. Her field journal. The handwriting started out small and neat, line after line about drilling speeds, ice core samples, geological anomalies, the excitement of a scientist touching something that didn't fit any known timeline. As the pages went on, the writing grew choppy, unsteady. Numbers gave way to short, subjective sentences, dreams too real, noises from empty rooms, the sense that darkness in the corners of a room shifted when nobody was looking. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. Hill's file said the team had been out of contact for 3 days, a 24-hour gap that nobody topside had any data for. I read the final line over and over. This artifact does not belong to our world. It does not belong to our time. The others don't understand yet, but they will. We are already lost, even as we walk and talk. These symbols are trying to tell us something. Understanding them changes you. I can feel it inside me. If anyone finds this, do not try to understand. Do not stay. Just leave. Run. I set the notebook down very gently, like if I moved too hard, the entire room would collapse. Beneath the suffocating heat, another draft of cold air was creeping in from somewhere. I pulled out the tablet and scrolled the schematics. Below the surface level were 2 more floors, connected by a newly built tunnel system leading to a point marked simply, Site Alpha. The place where it all started. I shoved the tablet back into my jacket, drew my gun again, and stepped out into the corridor. The heat was still heavy. The red lights still stretched shadows longer than they should have, like someone was pulling them to see what was inside. The stairway down was marked by a perfectly ordinary safety sign, except that the handrail had been carved full of those geometric shapes. Touching it, I could feel the grooves even through my gloves. Every footstep echoed twice, like someone was following exactly 1 step behind. The second level was different. Newer walls, fresh panels, nothing old enough to have worn in. Work lights hung from the ceiling, many burned out or removed. The symbols were no longer scattered. They covered everything, layered into dense text that no stable human mind could read all the way through. According to the schematic, storage came first, then the tunnel entrance. Steel racks lined both sides of the passage, stacked with drill heads, hoses, and core tubes. Some cores had been removed, the long, thin ice sections laid out on the floor, arranged in circles and straight lines just like the patterns on the walls. I didn't stare long. I didn't need another headache. The tunnel entrance was exactly where the schematic said it would be. An ugly hole cut into the wall, the edges still rough with incomplete welds, insulation exposed like slit-open guts, cables and conduits taped in place with industrial duct tape. I switched on the LED lamp on my helmet and stepped inside. The temperature dropped off a cliff. Within a few steps, my breath was fog again. The tunnel had been carved directly through ice, the surface smooth as if some giant scalpel had sliced it in sheets. Frozen footprints marked each step leading downward. The slope was steady, easy enough to descend, and the exact kind of gradient that would be hell to climb back up. My helmet light reached maybe 6 or 7 meters ahead. Beyond that, only solid black. The ice walls were close enough on both sides that I could have touched them simultaneously if I'd wanted. It felt like being swallowed, pressed through a giant bone tube. 20 minutes passed with only the sound of my boots grinding against ice and the faint cracking of the glacier somewhere deep inside the white mass. Then the ice began to glow. At first, it was just a faint blue smear, like my lamp reflecting back at me. But the deeper I went, the clearer it became, light emerging from inside the ice itself. Eventually, even with my headlamp off, the tunnel was bathed in a ghostly blue so cold it seeped into my marrow. The temperature dropped again. Even through Arctic-grade gear, the cold found its way into old fractures, reminding my bones of every injury I'd ever had. Absolute silence, no wind, no machinery. My body was the only thing making noise. Finally, the tunnel opened out. My headlamp swept over a space so large it was hard to reconcile with the footprint of the station above, a massive ice chamber at least 30 meters across and nearly as high. The walls curved upward into darkness, the ice glowing with that unnatural blue light. Around the perimeter, a few work lights had been set up. Most were dead, casings cracked, lying on their sides. A few still worked, throwing hard white beams that only made the shadows between them deeper. In the center was the thing that made me stop cold. A perfect black sphere, about 2.5 meters in diameter, resting on the ice. Not ordinary black. It didn't reflect. It didn't cast back any light at all. Looking at it felt like staring through a hole in the world, a place where my eyes couldn't find information, just absence. I moved closer, every bootstep ringing in the chamber like knuckles on a coffin. The closer I got, the stronger the pull. Everything else, lights, walls, equipment, blurred, as if the sphere were the only real object in the room. The tablet on my chest began to vibrate. The screen flickered, then went wild. The temperature readouts turned meaningless. Electromagnetic readings shot past the top of the scale. GPS spun, listing coordinates scattered across the globe like it was pulling raffle numbers. The radio emitted a low hum that didn't belong to any band. Not a signal, just a steady screech like the circuitry itself was singing along to a rhythm human ears weren't made for. I was about 3 meters from the sphere when a voice spoke behind me. Calm. Almost cheerful. Interesting, isn't it? I spun around, gun already drawn on reflex. The beam of my helmet lamp cut the darkness and landed on a figure standing in the tunnel mouth. At a glance, it looked human. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head. But every proportion was wrong. It was taller than normal, but not tall like a tall person. Tall like someone had grabbed a normal person by both ends and stretched. Limbs too long, joints bending in places joints shouldn't bend, elbows and knees twisted. The worst part was the face. There wasn't one. Where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been was just solid darkness. My lamp shone straight at it, and the light vanished, swallowed whole, nothing reflected. I kept the gun level with its chest, finger on the trigger. Every instinct screamed this thing was far beyond anything in our contingency scenarios. But training screamed just as loudly, confronted with an unknown threat, seize control with information. "Who are you?" I said. "Identify." The head tilted at an unnatural angle. When it spoke, if that could be called speaking, its voice flowed out smooth and effortless, like wind through an antenna. "You may call me the Observer. I watch, I record, I measure how your kind reacts when faced with what it cannot understand." One long, thin arm lifted, pointing at the sphere behind me. The movement wasn't like joints animating. It was like viscous liquid deciding to hold a shape. "This is one of our instruments, the group of scientists you're looking for. They were fascinating in their final moments. Their reactions to the impossible are excellent data." A different chill crawled down my spine. Nothing to do with -40 outside. The way it said final moments, the way it ignored my gun, everything about this meeting shredded the rules I used to understand the world. "Where are they?" I asked, forcing my voice to stay operational. "Where is the research team?" "Here," it said. "Gone. Dying. Time around our device does not move the way you are used to, Agent Dennis. Causality softens. States overlap." My name in its voice. I hadn't told anyone on site. Every detail of the mission was known only to Hill and a handful of others back in Anchorage. My finger tightened on the trigger. What I was about to do would earn me a formal reprimand in any normal operation. But nothing here was normal. I fired 3 rounds. The shots cracked off the ice, echoing around the chamber like thunder. Muzzle flash flared, reflected off the walls. There was no impact sound, no bullet hitting matter. The rounds passed straight through the space where its body stood, like they'd gone through empty air. It laughed, like shattering glass mixed with electrical arcsing. "Your weapons are built for threats that exist fully within your reality," it said. Amusement unmistakable. "You cannot harm something standing outside that frame. You, however, can die inside it, many times." The chamber began to warp. The ice walls rippled like water, the blue light pulsing to a rhythm that wasn't my heartbeat. Work lights strobed violently, shadows leaping in directions that didn't match any light source. The black sphere at my back swelled, or I shrank. Hard to say. Every natural sense of distance and scale bent like wire in a child's hands. The tablet screamed. No longer beeping like faulty equipment, it emitted a drawn-out metallic shriek. The screen flooded with impossible numbers. Temperatures that would vaporize steel, magnetic fields beyond any chart, GPS listing a dozen locations at once. Loss of balance hit like a punch to the ear. Up, down, left, right, swap places all at once. Any step I tried to take twisted sideways along an axis that didn't belong to 3-dimensional space. I stood still and still felt like I was falling. The observer's laughter didn't break. It stretched out, the background noise of a world coming apart. And then, in the space between heartbeats, everything stopped. I was standing at the tunnel mouth. My helmet light shone on the unfinished cut in the wall, insulation hanging out, cables wrapped in tape. The tablet in my hand showed normal readings, like it had just been turned on. The watch on my wrist read 3:17 p.m., the exact time I'd checked it before stepping into the tunnel. No cold sweat. My heart rate on the band was calm, like I'd just taken a casual walk. I looked down at my gun. It was still holstered, safety engaged. My chest swore I'd just run from a room folding in on itself to crush me. That torment burned sharp in my memory. But every piece of gear I carried agreed in unison. Nothing had happened. Something was badly wrong, not just with the station, but with the time wrapped around me. I took a deep breath. Then I stepped into the tunnel again. Here's the English translation exactly and cleanly. The second time, the path was identical, only I was no longer the same. I stepped down the ice ramp, counting under my breath. 47 steps from the doorway was where the tablet lost its GPS signal. The first time, I noted it down casually. This time, every step felt like following a script already written in my head. At the 47th step, the satellite icon on the screen flickered once, then shut off completely. The signal vanished, just like last time. Cold hit my face and neck, just like last time. A blue glow began seeping out of the ice walls, just like last time. Only my heartbeat was different. It was no longer the heartbeat of someone on their first expedition. It was the heartbeat of someone who had died once already, even if every device I carried insisted that memory was false. The footprints on the ice looked different to me as well. They weren't just the research team's prints. I recognized the tread pattern of the tactical boots issued to my unit. The groove on the heel, the chipped edge on the side, I had seen it every time I cleaned the mud off. I had walked this route before. My body had left marks, even if time tried to pretend it had never happened. The tunnel curved left where the ice bulged slightly, then opened into the main chamber. The ice chamber was still as wide as the mouth of a giant well. The walls still glowed blue. The construction lamp still flickered in a few scattered spots, as if the whole world had shrunk to a handful of tiny bulbs fighting against dense darkness. The black sphere was still there, sitting alone at the center, absurd and out of place. But this time, within a radius of about 5 meters around it, the ice floor was no longer empty. There were people. They lay in a ring, like 6 survey markers around a well. I slowed down, gun already drawn, helmet light sweeping across each face. It wasn't hard to recognize Dana Turner, even though I had never met her in person. I had stared at her photo until I was sick of it in the case file. Here, she lay on her back, arms spread, eyes wide open as if trying to see through whatever the sphere represented. Frost crusted her eyelashes and dusted her skin. Beneath that frost, there was something else. Her skin had been carved, not scratched in a panic, engraved. Geometric patterns identical to those on the walls, precise and deep, running along her neck, spreading into her temples, crawling down her arms. The others were the same. James Morrison curled like a fetus, hands gripping his head, but the carvings on his forearms were unmistakable. Sarah Chen hugged herself in a defensive posture that couldn't hide the rigid lines etched along her collarbone and upper arms. Each body was a different paragraph of the same language. I knelt beside Turner, keeping enough distance to shoot if anything sprang up. Papers were scattered around the bodies, no longer arranged neatly like the circle in the living quarters. They were strewn about, bent, trampled, flipped over by the cold wind. The last lines I had read upstairs were still there, but beside them were new pages, packed with geometric symbols instead of letters, as if, at some point, Turner's hand had decided to abandon the human alphabet entirely and switch to the language of something else. Interesting, isn't it? The voice came from the exact same corner of the chamber as last time. I shot up, spun my light, gun ready on instinct. The watcher stood there. Its limbs were too long, joints bent wrong, its face nothing but a dark mass swallowing light. "Welcome back," it said, tilting its head. "This is your second iteration. I'm very curious how many more it will take before you truly understand what you're looking at." My finger froze on the trigger. I remembered the sensation of firing last time, remembered how the bullet passed through it like smoke, Remembered the chamber warping, the walls folding like a crushed can. Remembered the feeling of being squeezed into nothing. But my gun was fully loaded. The holster showed no recoil marks, no gunpowder scent. My watch still read 3:17. You retained it, it continued, as if reading my thoughts. It stepped out of the shadow, its limbs moving in ways anatomy never intended. Memory persistence between iterations, rare for your kind. Most reset completely. They relearn the truth each time. Their minds shatter from repetition, not from the truth itself. If your goal is to break me, I said, voice dry, you could have chosen an easier method. Simplicity yields less data, it replied. I backed toward the tunnel. The first time, I ran too late. The walls had already folded around me. This time, I wanted to try something obvious, retreat early. But the tunnel entrance was gone. In its place was a smooth sheet of ice, flat, cold, faintly glowing. No cut marks, no seams, as if no passage had ever existed. I pressed myself against the wall, gun still aimed at the watcher. The exit appears when the iteration is complete, it explained gently, like a professor lecturing. Until then, you experience what I need you to experience, until the data suffices. The ice walls began to groan. This time, I knew what was coming before it happened. A crack high above spread like a spider web. The chamber floor seemed to breathe, expanding, contracting in heavy, slow pulses. The walls were no longer still. They were moving inward. The whole chamber was a giant lung tightening, and I was the only thing inside not allowed to inhale or exhale. 20 meters from the center, then 15, then 10. Each time the walls shifted, the researchers' bodies slid, pushed closer toward the black sphere like debris sucked into a whirlpool. The smell rose. Not decay. This cold preserved the bodies too well. It was something else. Chemicals, ozone, the scent of matter decomposing at a level smaller than tissue. The carvings on the walls blazed, each line radiating blinding white light, throbbing to the rhythm of someone's heartbeat. I wasn't sure it was still only mine. 5 meters. The bodies pressed around my legs, forming a barrier between me and the sphere. They were stiff as wood, knocking against my shins with hollow clacks, bone striking bone. 3 meters. Pressure crushed my chest, ears, finger joints. My ribs felt cinched by invisible straps. I heard my own teeth grinding. 2 meters. My back fused to the ice wall. The surface burned cold through my jacket and armor. Every breath became a choice. Inhale too much and there was no space left for lungs. Exhale too far and I might not get another chance. The watcher didn't move. It stood just a few steps away, its shadowed face level with mine, expressionless, yet somehow brimming with interest. Time here is just another variable to adjust, it said softly. Life as well, pain as well. Causality is only a suggestion. 1 meter. I couldn't move my arm anymore. My finger was still on the trigger, but my hand was pinned tight between my chest and the ice. The watcher leaned its eyeless face close, so near I could feel the void behind it, like an opening into another world. See you again, it whispered. My vision collapsed, shrinking to a blinking red dot somewhere on the wall, an emergency light. Then even that disappeared. There was no slow blackout, no spinning, no fading. One moment I was being crushed into something no longer human, the next everything was gone. No weight, no sound, no body left to feel pain. I fell, but there was no direction to call down. When I opened my eyes, I stood at the tunnel entrance. My helmet light shone on the exposed insulation on the wall. The tablet displayed stable readings. The watch blinked coldly at 3:17 p.m. The second time I died. The second time I returned to the start. The second time every device on me said, that didn't happen. I turned toward the station. A simple, instinctive thought, don't go down again. Go elsewhere. Try breaking the loop by not participating. I walked. 1, 2, 3. At 50 steps, the second-floor hallway began forming in my imagination. I could almost smell the stale heat from upstairs. Then I blinked. My helmet light was once again shining on the exposed insulation, on the taped cables. Under my feet was the first step leading down into the pit. My watch still read 3:17. I didn't remember returning. Didn't remember turning around, didn't remember retracing my steps. My memory stopped at step 50. Everything after had been cut clean. The third iteration began like that. Here is your English translation, exactly and fully rendered. I stood on the first step leading down into the bunker, my hand resting on the metal railing that felt as cold as if it had just been cast from ice. My mind was unnaturally empty, like someone had taken a knife and sliced away a piece of memory from just seconds earlier, then sealed the edges with something invisible. I knew I hadn't come back here on my own. I knew my body hadn't turned itself around, hadn't walked backward from the upper hallway to return to the exact starting point. But on this third loop, there wasn't a single trace on me to confirm it. No muscle ache, no short breath, only a cold clarity, as if the new loop had been rebooted cleanly from the beginning, except the memory remained intact. And that was what made it the most terrifying. I carefully inhaled, checking myself. My nose picked up a faint smell of ozone, the lingering scent from the second loop when the ice wall had pressed against me. But on my cold-resistant suit, there were no scratches, no cracked plating, no burst capillaries. Death left no marks, but memory did. I walked down the slope. This time, I counted aloud inside my helmet, as if resisting the feeling of invisible strings tugging at me. 1, 2, 3, 10, 20, 47. The GPS signal cut out. Again, I stood still for a few seconds, listening to my heartbeat merge with the loop like a confirmation. Yes, you're here again. Yes, you're stepping in the exact same rhythm. Yes, everything is still keeping to its script. This time, the tunnel light was slightly different. It took me 2 seconds to realize. The blue was no longer a pure, cold blue. It carried something, a hint of purple, a hint of red, like the glow of blood vessels shining from inside the walls. My breath in front of me grew thicker, breaking apart into tiny ice crystals like glass dust. I kept walking. In loops 1 and 2, the tunnel had become familiar enough that I knew every ice joint, every vibration. But in loop 3, something wasn't exactly the same. I couldn't tell whether it was because I remembered the past too clearly or because the tunnel itself was adjusting in the direction it wanted. I shone my light onto the ice floor. A new footprint appeared at the edge of my path, not from the research team, not from me. This one was larger, deeper, with a tread pattern far more modern and military grade than anything issued to my unit. And most importantly, it was still wet, water pooling in the grooves, not yet frozen. Someone had walked ahead of me, right before I was placed back into the loop. I knelt down, touched it lightly with a finger. The water was cold like metal in the dark. And then, when I shined the light farther, 2 footprints, then 3, then an entire line leading into the wide ice chamber. They went in, but none came back out. I rose and moved slowly, my throat tightening on instinct. The only thing I could hear now wasn't my own footsteps, but another sound, a damp sound, a steady dripping like melting water falling from above. I tilted my light straight upward. The ice overhead was darker than usual, as if scorched. Drops of water fell one by one, evaporating mid-air before reaching the ground, turning into a thin mist. Then I saw it, a handprint embedded deep in the ice ceiling, 5 fingers splayed wide, like someone had been pressed with such force it cut through a meter of solid ice. The hand was unnaturally large, as if it didn't belong to any human. At the mouth of the large ice chamber, I stopped. Loop 1, I died crushed. Loop 2, I died when the chamber contracted. Loop 3, what was waiting for me now? The chamber looked identical to before, but not entirely empty anymore. The black sphere still sat in the center, blatant and impossible. But around it, exactly 5 meters out, this time it wasn't just the bodies of the research team. Someone was standing there, standing upright, not hunched, not shivering, not collapsed like the discarded corpses. The figure faced away from me, wearing the exact same suit I wore, from boots to gloves, helmet to oxygen tank. I raised my light. The figure raised their light. I lowered mine. They lowered theirs, perfectly in sync. A shiver ran down my spine. "No way," I whispered. The person standing there slowly turned his face toward me. I saw myself, fully, Exact height, exact face, every tiny scar on the bridge of my nose from that fall when I was 19. Only one thing was different. His eyes were completely white. No pupil, no sclera, no iris, just a milky white haze, like frost on a corpse's eyes. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there mirroring me like a faulty reflection. I tightened my grip on my gun. The cold metal bit into my palm as if reminding me, "Don't tremble." "Did the Watcher send you?" I asked. He didn't answer, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch, not a smile, but a faint spasm, like someone was trying to operate a face they weren't familiar with. I took a step forward. He stepped forward. I stepped back. He stepped back. But when I stood still, he changed. He began moving toward me, very slowly, very deliberately, no longer mimicking, as if he had finished practicing and now it was time to perform. When the distance between us narrowed to 3 meters, he opened his mouth, not to speak, but to exhale. That breath wasn't human. It came out like wind hissing through a pipe, carrying a thick ozone smell and a sound my ears processed instantly, not breathing, whispering. The same whisper from Loop 1, from Loop 2, from the echoing ice walls, from the Watcher itself. And then he produced 2 words, exactly 2. My voice, but warped, stretched like a corrupted recording. "Don't hide." Those words slammed into me like a memory shoved back into my skull. I didn't even have time to react before he lunged. Not ran, not jumped, but slid across the ice at an impossible speed, like he was made for this terrain. He struck me with inhuman acceleration, and I barely managed to raise my gun. I pulled the trigger. The bullet passed through his head like passing through snow. He didn't stop, didn't slow, didn't falter for even a heartbeat. He slammed into me. His skin was cold like dry ice. His hand grabbed my throat, not squeezing but pressing, as if trying to glue me to the ice chamber right there. "You are not me," I growled. He tilted his head as though processing data. Then he tightened his grip, the force unlike muscle, more like pressure than strength. At that moment, the chamber walls began to move, not contracting like in Loop 2, not vibrating like in Loop 1, but opening. Cracks formed in the ice ahead of me, splitting apart like a doorway. Beyond the ice wasn't a wall or rock or darkness, but a void. Endless, pitch black, but not the black of space. It was black like deep water, like something waiting beneath a frozen lake rather than above ground. Cold surged out so violently my thermal suit creaked. My light was swallowed instantly. My duplicate, the thing holding me, turned its head toward the opening as if being summoned. Then I heard the Watcher's voice, very close, very low, inside my skull. "Loop 3 will be different. You will not die here." I wanted to answer, but my double suddenly dragged me toward the void. My throat was crushed to the point my breath shattered. I tried kicking, struggling, reaching for my knife. Useless. He was stronger, faster, and so cold my hands felt glued to his suit. The opening widened. Ice split like flesh torn by claws. A black ash-like vapor poured out, slamming into my face, whispering thousands of tiny voices too faint to separate. My double lifted me effortlessly, like a puppet. And then he spoke, this time clearly, fully, using my own vocal cords, but distorted, like dragged through a wall of ice. "Come with me." He pushed me into the void. No weight, no light, no direction. No sound except myself being swallowed. I fell and fell. When consciousness returned, I was standing at the mouth of the tunnel again. My helmet light hit the exposed insulation. GPS stable, 3:17 p.m., Loop 3. Here is the English translation exactly and cleanly, with no added commentary. I stood completely still for nearly a full minute. No heavy breathing, no turning my head, no movement, just standing there. Exactly where I was supposed to stand in Loop 3. The edge of the passage leading down to the ice cellar of Research Station 7, where the GPS signal always dropped in the same scripted way, where everything repeated like a story machine that never missed a beat. But something was wrong. Very wrong. In Loop 3, right after my copy shoved me into that deep black void, I woke up again from the beginning. Exactly how the cycle operated. The system should have reset me to the initial point just like the first 2 times. Above the hallway, artificial white lights, the sound of air vents, and the low rumble of the furnace. But this time, I woke up right under the cellar. Not in the hallway. Not at the starting point. Not where the loop had reset me before. I was below. Exactly where I had walked those 47 steps. I wasn't starting over anymore. I was continuing. It felt like someone playing a game, dying 3 times, then suddenly no longer being sent back to the beginning, but kept exactly where they died, still holding every memory, every mistake, every fear still hot under their skin. If the system was changing the rules, it meant it was beginning a new test. I swallowed a cold gulp of saliva. My headlamp shone onto the ice floor where the strange footprints from Loop 3 still remained. My heart clenched tight. They were still there. And worse, there were new ones. Large prints. Not mine. Not my copies. Not from any member of the research team. These prints were deep, warped, spreading outward at 2 angles. Not the lugs of tactical boots, more like claws. As if some creature weighing several hundred kilos had walked on the soft ice. I crouched down, shining my light closer. The prints had no sharp edges, slightly sunken, distorted to one side. And inside them, not snow, not ice, not pooled water, but a thin membrane, gray and opaque like skin from someone's body. I took a heavy breath and froze when I realized my breathing sounded louder than normal. Not because I was breathing hard, but because the place was unnaturally silent. No echo from the tunnel, no wind hissing through vents, no faint crackles of adjusting ice. I straightened, ears straining. A tiny whisper drifted from somewhere near the ceiling. Don't. Turn back. I froze in place. The voice, it was my voice. But not like the white-eyed copy from before. This one was older, more broken, trembling as if the speaker had gone through too many loops and finally lost the sense of their own voice. I steadied my breathing and slowly aimed my light at the ceiling. No handprint on the ice this time. Instead, a face was pressed into it. Exactly the shape of a human face, but distorted, stretched upward. Eyes sunken, nose flattened, mouth open wide as if screaming. Yet no sound came out. The face was mine. I stepped back half a pace. At the spot where I had just stood, the ice floor dipped into an unnatural patch of darkness, as if something beneath it was bracing its hands, pushing upward. Don't stay still. Don't wait. Don't let it adjust me. I walked quickly toward the central chamber where the black sphere lay. Each step I took, I checked for that familiar push dragging me back to the starting. Pulled at me. Loop 4 was letting me continue. But the question was, why? As I approached the central chamber, I immediately noticed what was different. The black sphere was no longer sitting still at the center. It floated higher than in Loop 3, level with my head, and it was no longer fully black. Thin glowing veins appeared across its surface, like moonlight squeezed into strands of silver crawling over the skin of some creature. The veins moved. They crawled. They pulsed as if something inside was trying to escape. I stepped closer and sound emerged. Not the stable humming from the first 2 loops, not the erratic whispering from the third, but a sound like a heartbeat. Each thump clear, loud, slow, as if a gigantic living thing was breathing within the sphere. 20 beats per minute. 18, 17. It was sleeping. And I felt something even clearer. It knew I was here. The hairs on my neck rose as a faint slicing sound drifted behind me, soft like the tip of a snake brushing across the ice. I swung the light quickly. Nothing. But the temperature plunged, like someone had opened a door to another world. The wrist gauge read 58 degrees Celsius, then dropped to minus 62 degrees Celsius in seconds. The ice began to crack, not at the walls, not on the ceiling, not near the sphere, but directly beneath me. I immediately activated the boot anchors, locking myself to the ice. 3 long fractures spread outward toward the sphere as if pulled by a force emanating from it. Then a familiar sound echoed, strained, harsh, distorted, like a crushed speaker trying to scream, "You must not proceed." My voice, was it me from another loop? Or my copy? Or the sphere sampling my voice and replaying it? I swept my light around. No one. Then I realized something. My shadow on the ice was wrong. It didn't match my movements. It lagged half a second, then a full second. Then it stood still. even as I moved. My heart twisted painfully. I raised my hand to test it. My shadow stayed bowed, unmoving, not raising its hand. Then the shadow slowly lifted its head and stared straight at me. Two white eyes opened in the darkness where shadow should have been. I stepped back. It wasn't my shadow malfunctioning. Something was using it to watch me. Suddenly, the ice shook violently, knocking me to my knees. From the sphere, a cracking sound erupted, like stone splitting, but with an unsettling softness beneath it, like flesh tearing. The glowing veins spread, wrapping the sphere like living vines. And I understood. Loop 4 wasn't for me to observe anymore. It was for it to begin emerging. I turned toward the tunnel. I didn't need to defeat it. I just needed to leave, find a way out, break the loop. But behind me, a voice whispered, so close it felt like someone speaking against my neck, "Don't turn around." I didn't dare move. My whole body locked, because this time, it's standing right behind you. Cold air crept across the back of my neck, like the breath of someone twice my height bending down. I slowly gripped my survival knife, not turning, keeping my breathing steady, fighting the tremor in my hands. The space behind me grew darker than darkness itself. The cold thickened like living skin, and the heartbeat inside the sphere skipped. I knew what it was about to do, about to touch me. I tightened my grip on the knife, trying not to let my fingers slip on the frost forming over my gloves. Then something placed a hand on my left shoulder. Large, cold, heavy, not human. I swallowed dryly. "Don't turn back." Not my voice, not a human voice. Here is the English translation exactly as requested, with no added commentary. The hand on my shoulder wasn't just cold, it had texture. Not skin, not ice, more like the membrane of a deep-sea creature, flexible but taut, tough like damp rubber. The surface was slightly rough, each point of contact like microscopic hairs brushing against the fabric, sending a shiver up my spine. I still didn't turn around. Every instinct screamed, turn and stab it. But the memory of the last 3 loops kept my head still. Loop 1, turn around, crushed to death. Loop 2, face it directly, walls compress, dead. Loop 3, fight the copy, thrown into the void. Loop 4 seemed to be testing whether I had learned. I held my breath, kept my voice from shaking. "What do you want?" The air behind me vibrated softly, like metal ringing in the wind. The answer wasn't words. It was 3 taps. Soft. Even. Right beside my neck. I froze. 3 taps. Not 2. Not 4. That number wasn't random. 3. The exact number of loops in which I died. It was counting. Another voice brushed against my ear, deep, etched, not human, like someone speaking through a layer of water. "This time, don't die." I shut my eyes for a second, steadying my heartbeat. "You want me alive? For what?" The cold behind me paused, like it was thinking. Then the hand on my shoulder pressed harder. Not squeezing, but heavier, as if its weight increased millimeter by millimeter. My shoulder began to throb. The voice again, clearer. "To see." I didn't understand, but I knew I couldn't stay still. Its behavior changed every loop, optimizing. That meant the loop was learning from me, from my reactions. If I let it lead, I was just a lab rat. I raised my right hand, very slowly, to the latch of the heat canister strapped to my back, the only thing capable of producing enough warmth to matter at 60 degrees Celsius. Keeping my voice steady, I said, "You want me to see? Fine, but I'm not letting you stand behind me." I yanked the latch. Boom. The heat canister fired its emergency valve, blasting a jet of 120 degrees Celsius air behind me. The scream that burst out wasn't animal, machine, or human. It was like pressure rupturing inside a metal tube. A warped hiss pushed through lungs that didn't follow biology. The hand flew off my shoulder. I dove forward, regained balance, rolled sideways, turning in the narrow space. My headlamp lit the thing behind me, and I wished I hadn't seen it. The creature was twice my height, but its body didn't stand straight like a human. Its spine arched backward as if bent by a different gravity. Its entire surface was covered in a thin, dull gray membrane, semi-transparent, and beneath it, something moved. Not muscle, not organs. Thin, white lines of light connected like circuitry running across its whole form. These were the same lines I'd seen crawling across the sphere. It was born from inside that thing, Its face had no eyes, no nose, only a deep, wide mouth like a slit torn across its entire head, pure darkness inside like a bottomless pit, and in the middle of its chest a depression, the exact shape of a human hand. Not its hand. A human hand. My hand? I remembered Loop 3, my copy grabbing my chest, shoving me into the void. That force, it seemed to have imprinted itself on the thing standing before me. It didn't hiss, didn't lunge. It simply tilted its head to the left, the same way the Watcher used to. It wasn't the Watcher, but it was learning to mimic. My headlamp reflected off its body. The gray membrane quivered, shrinking like fish skin near a flame. Heat bothered it. I lowered my stance, survival knife tight in my left hand, my right brushing the gun's barrel to flick off the safety. The creature stepped forward. On the ice floor, its footprint sank deeper than in the last loop. The cold in the chamber plunged to -70 degrees Celsius. Do not kill it. The voice echoed from everywhere, not from the creature, not from the sphere, from the ice walls themselves. Another voice followed, like three people whispering at once. My voice, my copy's voice, and the Watcher's voice blended. If it dies, the loop collapses. You collapse with it. The creature rotated halfway, its mouth moving, not speaking. Running symbols across its teeth, white glowing symbols like the ones carved into Turner and Sarah Chen. Those symbols moved like living script. The creature spread its arms. It didn't attack. It waited, as if asking me to come closer. I shook my head. You want me to touch you? It nodded. The ice chamber screeched like twisted metal. Looking at it, at the sphere, at the bodies with geometric symbols carved into their skin. Everything aligned into one horrifying possibility. Loop 4 wasn't meant to kill me. It was meant to make me part of it, part of the system, part of the symbol structure, part of the loop. I pulled the second emergency latch on the heat canister. If heat weakened this thing, I had one chance. I gripped the knife. All right. My breath frosted in the air. You want me closer. I charged. The creature opened its arms to receive me. I triggered the heat valve straight into its chest, where the human handprint was embedded. The chamber flared white and snapped to black. No weight, no sound, no body. I fell through darkness again. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on my back, on the ice floor, before the sphere. My headlamp flickered. GPS dead. 3:17. The loop hadn't ended, but this time I wasn't at the entrance. I woke up in the central chamber. Loop 5 had begun.